Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of Hanging Out with the Sahaba. And I'm joined once again by Apostate Aladdin. Thank you so much for joining me again for this. Wouldn't have
Thank
done
you
it
for
with
having
anyone
me.
else. Yeah. So last time, I didn't realize this, but it was almost exactly a month ago that we did part one, where we talked about, I would say, the more prominent companions of Muhammad. So Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr, and Ali. And so these are basically the people we're going to talk about today are the people we didn't get a chance to talk about last time because there was just so much to explore and discuss with those first three. And so these Sahaba are not as prominent, but they are still pretty significant figures in Islamic tradition, very prominent figures in Islamic history, especially early history. And I'm sure they'll be familiar of anyone who's watching who's an ex-Muslim. Yeah, and so let's see how many people we have in the live stream right now. We have about 12, but as you were mentioning off air, sometimes people don't get the notification until the whole live stream starts. So shall we just get right into it?
Yeah. They're probably going to catch up
Okay.
when they start watching. Yeah.
All right. So first up is Khalid ibn al-Walid. So Khalid is someone who I found pretty interesting when I was growing up, and this is again from watching the movie Al-Risala, The Message, when I was growing up. One of the most compelling things I found in that movie and in just in Islamic tradition. So that movie is, for anyone who hasn't seen it, basically it's from the 70s, I believe, and it depicts the early history of Islam without showing Muhammad or Ali or a whole bunch of other people. How they managed to do that is actually kind of incredible. How do you show? It's like showing Lord of the Rings without showing Gandalf or Frodo or Aragorn or anyone like that. Anyway, so what was so compelling about his story was he was actually an ardent opponent of Islam in the beginning. His tribe were very opposed to Islam, and he was known as a great warrior. And he actually fought against the Muslims in a few of the first couple of battles between Muslims and the tribe, Muhammad's tribe, who didn't want Muhammad to do what he was doing, essentially. But what happened was Khalid was so moved by the sacrifice and the courage and the bravery of the Muslims that he was fighting and killing that he just felt there had to be something there. And he later converted and became a great military commander for the Muslims. And he fought in a lot of wars and campaigns after the death of Muhammad for Abu Bakr until I believe he was dismissed by Umar ibn al-Khattab because one of the reasons I think from my memory is that he was threatened by the power and the reputation that Khalid had. And yeah, he kind of just retired and
You
died.
know, as you were telling me this, I'm thinking of just to make this clear, it's not some official theory or anything. Just for fun, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about how um, the narrative that we learn about and reality might be a little different, but also with the same event. Like, for example, him being moved by the sacrifice and the
Yeah.
willingness of these Muslims to die could just mean, how did they get so many soldiers to be such, brave, sacrificial fighters? That must be a great strategy. And then Omar
Oh man,
being
these
threatened.
soldiers, I could get a much better army if I just convert.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you can't beat him, join him kind of thing. And and Omar being threatened by it, it's all like a political drama kind of Real Housewives of Muhammad,
Exactly.
Real
Yeah,
Generals of
real life
Muhammad.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just something that crossed my mind.
No, the thing that I think really moved me about his story specifically was it just showed the grace and generosity and forgiveness within Islam that someone who killed so many of the first Muslims, someone who was a very violent person, someone who was their enemy, was accepted into the fold without, I mean, this is the story that's told without any judgment or any hatred. He was just welcomed into the community. And I would say that's such a powerful thing for anyone who's learning about Islam, whether they're a recent convert or someone born into it, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, that crossed my mind too. And um kind of the devil's advocate in me. I was going to say the Muslim in me. Ironic wording. Uh, the devil's advocate in me is thinking, well, it makes sense because he's going to be like it makes sense in the context of religion because those people who died will die shuhada, right?
Yeah,
Martyrs, and they're going to be rewarded for their death. And then his slate is clean now. But what you mentioned about or what I'm thinking about is the human component. I mean, even if those people are going to heaven, people who fought alongside them, their family, members of the community, must feel some kind of unease around this outsider joining. But if they're able to overcome this, if that's truly the case, that they're able to overcome this and have this kind of cohesion, that it's such a strong system to be able to put itself above the human needs and emotions. You know what I mean?
of course. Yeah. It's really interesting because it's in a sense one of the best ways where you can just indoctrinate people with these kinds of inspiring stories. And I think for in Khalid's case, what's so interesting too, and I should mention at this point that uh, so Khalid was a very vicious person, as we're going to see in this hadith about him. But he's a product of his time, and this is something we discussed in part one, where we're not saying these people were horrible people. Period. They were for the most part products of their time and products of their environment. But the thing is, within the Islamic tradition, they're elevated to this status of being amazing people. Every kind of positive attribute you can assign someone was given to Sahaba like Khalid. And it's when you learn about him a bit more that that's kind of shattered. And so the hadith I wanted to talk about is something that was very controversial actually at the time as well. And I do remember learning about this during my Islamic education class when I was growing up in the Middle East. And so I'll just pull it up here for everyone to see. Just give me one moment. All right. So I'm gonna read it. So this is just an anecdote from something Khalid did while the Prophet Muhammad was still alive. So the Prophet sent Khalid ibn Walid to a tribe, Bani Javima, and Khalid invited them to Islam, but they could not express themselves by saying Aslamna, but they started saying Sabatna, I think, is that the word, Sabatna? We have come out of one religion to another. And Khalid kept on killing some of them and taking some of them as captives and gave every one of us his captive. And so then Khalid ordered that each man, each Muslim soldier, should kill his captive. And this person narrating this said, by Allah, I will not kill my captive, and none of my companions will kill his captive. And they basically told the Prophet this whole story, and the Prophet's reaction was, oh Allah, I'm free from what Khalid has done. So just explain a little bit of the context of this story. So this was during a time period when Islam was relatively new, and they were battling all of these tribes in the nearby region, and there were a lot of tribes that were shifting alliances with tribes that were fighting Muhammad and the first Muslims, and then shifting to join the Muslims, and then betraying the Muslims. So there was a lot of this kind of stuff going on. And so what happened in this case was, based on this version of the story, Khalid just didn't believe that these people had converted to Islam, and so just started killing them to teach them a lesson. And so there's a couple of other versions of the story that I'm going to explain in a second, but yeah, just your first thoughts.
Well, I want to understand why did they say Sabatna instead of not that I'm victim blaming to be clear, but why did they say Sabatna instead of Aslamna?
So that's
Because
an
that means
interesting.
something like we apostatized or something like that, right?
Well, there's
Like we left
actually
one religion.
multiple versions of what that means. I think it's also a word used to describe another religion that existed at the time. I think it's called, I
Okay.
don't know what it's called in Arabic, actually. It's called the Sabian religion in English. And
Okay.
so he thought that, according to this version, that they were saying that we had converted to this other religion
Oh, so
besides
it's a clear
Islam.
misunderstanding. It's a simple misunderstanding then.
Yeah. So,
Can't fault him for that.
so this is the narrative I was taught in school, was that Khalid misunderstood what they said and decided to implement the punishment that they were doing for people who had betrayed them. and people who are not converting to Islam, but were
So wait,
pretending
you
to.
said two things: betrayed them and converting to Islam. How are they betraying them by joining a
So,
different religion? Yeah,
so they betrayed them by pretending to be Muslim. So that's what
but
Khalid fought.
they said sabatna. How did he get that misunderstanding?
So he thought that they had converted when he came, and then once he actually saw them and they were talking, they said something different. So he was like, "Oh, these
Okay,
people are just making things up as they go along.
hypocrites, munafiqeen.
They're hypocrites." Yeah, but
Well, yeah. I my thoughts on that are the conclusion is what really irks me, because I've seen that similar conclusion in other stories in Islam where one of the Sahaba does something horrific, like burns people or kills his slave for insulting the Prophet, apparently. And
yeah,
the Prophet would say, "Oh, like, I didn't instruct them to do that." Like, what a spineless little man. Like, they're under your command. You taught them this. You didn't teach it with enough nuance, so to speak, so that they don't rush to kill people and enslave them. It's such a, spineless move.
yeah. I mean, the way the narrative is presented here, it's that Muhammad was basically saying, like, if you just look at the very end of it,
Mhm.
that let me just pull it up again.
Like,
Muhammad is saying,
is there context that's not in this hadith about the conclusion?
not much as far as I'm aware from my research. It's just
Mhm.
in Muhammad's case, he's like, "Oh man, Khalid has done it again. What am I gonna do with him?" And the my understanding was that Khalid was basically a bit too brutal for what Muhammad wanted, but he was such a valuable military commander that won them battle after battle that it was essentially tolerated.
He could take the PR hit basically for the
Yeah, yeah,
efficiency. It's horrific because, like, the people who this happened to, say it happened to Muslims, then the Muslim answer would be, well, they're going to get rewarded in Jannah for what was done to them. Like, they're going to get extra reward, as if that cancels out somehow. But putting that aside, there are people who were kuffar, for example, that
yeah.
I can't remember which Sahabi burned them. Did we talk about this in the previous?
Maybe a little bit. I
I
can't
don't remember.
remember.
There's so many horrific things that we can't
Yeah,
even, like, put a finger
can't
on
keep
which
track.
one is which. And s- and that person, it may have been Ali, but don't quote me on that. He burned these kuffar, and somebody else, another Sahabi, said, if it were me, I wouldn't burn them, because the Prophet said, like, only Allah is the one who does the burning. So
Mhm.
the harm already happened, and those people aren't going to get compensated for it in the afterlife somehow, because they're kuffar. So who's going to pay for these misunderstandings, right? Like, even within the context of an Islamic paradigm, how is this just an oopsie? Like, how did he not realize that his tone needs to change and his instructions need to be clear? I'm talking about Muhammad or Allah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also beyond that, isn't it like, again, for the religion that is of peace and tolerance and all that, why is this the recourse to just, slaughter them? Even if they had, tried to trick Khalid and the Muslims who were there into thinking that they had converted, but they hadn't actually. Why do they deserve death? And so one of the arguments I've heard is, well, this was the early time in Islam's history, and they had to be. You already know what I'm going to say. They had to be brutal
Go
in
ahead,
order to
say.
survive. They had to be
Mhm.
brutal. It was a brutal time, and
Everybody was
like,
doing it. Yeah.
yeah. Well, what
That's
makes
just how
Islam so
reality
special
was.
then?
Well, no, well, Islam had to work within the paradigm of, its time. So it just had to, slavery just had to get along with it. Brutal killings and war, that's just what you do at times of war, which is, the narrative is it's always a time of war, kind of. Like, they always had to be on the defensive, offensively defensive sometimes. So yeah, I don't understand how, even if all of this is correct, how do you just mistakenly fall into this anger of preemptively doing all this stuff without double checking? Because we always hear, like, hudud in Islam, although this doesn't, I don't know if this counts exactly as hudud. The Muslims defend this by saying it's a horrible punishment, but they have to be extra sure. That's why there's witnesses. That's why there's an investigation. Then how does it come from one of the most trusted generals, basically, and Sahaba, that such a mistake would happen? The
Mhm.
system is faulty. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you just look at the first couple of decades, or maybe you could even go first century of Islam's history, it was just almost constant warfare, constant expansion, uh, constant conquest, constant conquest being described as self-defense, taking them from Arabia to the edge of Europe. And that's kind of the line that I always found was kind of blurred. Where does the self-defense stop, and where does the spreading Islam by the sword end? It seems to be that those things were just happening simultaneously. Maybe the self-defense thing was being used as a justification, and maybe
I don't even
even
know. Like there are Muslims who don't believe in the whole self-defense argument. They plainly say, no, like
it's true.
this is how you spread the truth, and you got to do what you got to do, because whatever this reality of a war is, it's less brutal than the torture in the afterlife. So this is, in a sense, this is for the greater benefit of people. Um, but to add to all of that, let's say this was the reality of the time, and they were
Yeah.
such like a persecuted group somehow, always the persecuted group. Then why don't we have a new religion, right? That God would reveal it in a more appropriate time for today, that clearly doesn't have to do with all this, or for example, is more adjusted to more modern warfare, right? Like that would
Mhm.
be a better strategy than whether to kill them with a sword or with one blow or not. Like none of that is relevant to us today, and it just causes confusion. So we need one for a more peaceful time. And if you could argue that there still are wars and conflict and persecution, we need one more tailored for today's flavor of it. So it doesn't make sense that this is the updated, the last release of Islam, of the religion of God. Yeah,
Very, very well
very
put.
buggy.
Yeah, very buggy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, is there anything else you want to discuss about this hadith before we move on?
Um, it's okay. Let me read that part again. So there was a part about how they would enslave some and kill some, and just so casually. Um, and what was it? Khalid ordered that each man would kill his captive. Why is
Correct.
that? I don't understand the logic behind that. Like we've had our fun with it, or I'm so angry, or like I've changed my mind that now I think they deserve execution as well. Um, it doesn't make sense, especially if those groups are, they're saying like women and children and so on, they get taken as captives instead of killed, and then suddenly the dynamics of the economy changed. That's what they use as an excuse, right? Like that's just how the economy was. And then who was it who said, "I won't kill my captive"? Uh, a Muslim soldier said, "I won't kill my."
Yeah,
Who said?
the narrator of the hadith. I'm not familiar with who
Right.
the person was.
Okay.
Well, well,
I'm
like the example of that is you can see that even within the Muslim community, there was like shock. Like, why are we doing this? This is intense.
So it's the father of Salim. Looking at this chain from the hadith that you linked, it's عن سالم عن أبيه قال بعث النبي. So I guess
Yeah.
it's Abu Salim or whatever, who refused to kill his captive. Yeah. So that decision was un-Islamic, one would say. Like again, when we're arguing within the viewpoint of Islam, that decision is un-Islamic. You can't just decide to suddenly, I want to end the lives of my slaves. So this guy was not only committing crimes against humanity, he was committing crimes against the Islamic judicial system. And Muhammad just kept him around, and he said, God, check this out. That wasn't me. I didn't do that. Like, what a spineless move that doesn't resolve anything. Like, it's not going to change things in the future. It doesn't make up for that horrificness. Like, I just, I'm out of words, to be honest, at the brutality of this and the casualness of the prophet at just not doing anything. I
It,
feel like if I could do a better, like if I could react better than Muhammad, how is he the best man in humanity?
Yeah, and that's just the essence of the point with this hadith, is that Islam is upheld to this amazing lofty standard, but what Khalid did makes sense by the logic of ancient times. And some would argue it still happens today. You do this very brutal punishment, and that scares other people from doing the same thing. So it's like sending a message. And again, shouldn't Islam be different if we're supposed to believe that it's this message from God and it changed things? And as someone someone in the comment says, Islam 2 DLC just dropped.
All you got to do is give up your whole life, and that's all.
Yeah. And Nazone 75 says, no longer is Islam spread by the sword or by its great contributions or logic. It's spread by reproduction,
I
which
have
is
something to say about that. You want to go first?
well, I was just going to say that I kind of agree with that point, and it's true for a lot of religions, especially the ones that really promote having children.
That's a great point. It's not like people think it's only singling out Islam. There's a component to that, but also that's how religions spread. They're by population growth. They're not by convincing, they're by indoctrination. Like you're raised into it. And that's why there are 1 point whatever billion Muslims. It's not because of conversion through chatting. It's because of however the initial conversions happen and the growth of the population since. But what I had in mind is I used to read this as a Muslim and like, after leaving Islam and think that's a racist narrative. But it is absolutely real, like to the point that Muslims themselves are saying, they keep throwing it in my face sometimes. They're like, Islam is going to be the most popular religion by this year, whatever, and that's why we should have more kids and so on. I don't know if that's really going to happen because I feel like in this age of information, it's just neutering Islam left and right, and it just needs a little bit of time. But it is true that the biggest growth factor of Islam is just kids being born, more kids than usual.
Kind of a side tangent question, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But like when I hear stuff like that, it always makes me think about like, should I have children to, you know what I mean? Like
to
just
participate in the fight.
to fight like in this reproductive war. And like me personally, I don't have any kids, and um, I used to be very opposed to the idea of having kids. But lately I've been thinking, not necessarily to counter Islam or anything like that, but
Yeah.
to just, have someone who I can raise and share my ideas and thoughts about life and religion and all
Khalifa
that.
fil ard.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just wondering if you've ever had those kinds of thoughts or.
So it'll come down to, are you prioritizing or thinking about the welfare of humanity going forward? Like that's your angle, that I want to contribute to the reproductive war. I want to contribute to the welfare of humanity or keeping the world a good place by adding, hopefully, a good contribution. Is that what
Mhm.
you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know because I feel like there's many factors. It's like you said, it's a bit of a tangent. Like overpopulation. Am I adding to the problem of overpopulation, for example? A bunch of things like that. And I don't know. I feel like I can only my capacity for care is already being exhausted by things that I care about in this era. So
Yeah.
I can't care to that extent about the next generation and the one after it, to the point that I'm going to sacrifice a huge chunk of my life to raise a human so that hopefully they will contribute in their tiny, minuscule contribution to the wellness of the world. It's a balance that I'm not sure whether I can have. Yeah.
I think I'm in the same place right now, but I don't know. I'm open to maybe doing it in the future. And we have a question from Khalid here. So Khalid, we're going to take questions at the very end. So if you want to just ask again, if you're still around, maybe we can discuss this if that's something you
Oh,
want
and
to
by the way,
discuss.
you can bookmark them on StreamYard if
Yes,
you see that
indeed.
option.
Yeah, it's bookmarked.
And Robert, I guess we can we comment on Robert's comment?
This
Uh,
one, if you use your children
yeah.
for evolution, they're going to have mental problems, I promise. Well, the way I would put it is if you're, I mean, me personally, I would want to also have kids so that they could become professional soccer players. Uh, so the thing is, if you raise kids and you're telling them, just to use the soccer example, you're going to be a soccer player, and you just hammer it into them, you take them to the training field from the moment they're 3 years
You're going to
old,
be a Muslim.
or whatever. There's a very good chance they're going to resent it and not want to do it later on in life. And so if when I'm talking about having a kid, I wouldn't be telling them you are here so you can continue my secular project after my death or whatever. I would just raise them to like the fundamental things that I believe are true, things that are good practices and good beliefs, and teach them to think for themselves and give them books, give them an education, and then let them decide for themselves. I mean, it's very possible they could be a serial killer. It's very possible that they could convert to a religion. I don't know.
Yeah, and my answer to that would be it, even my contribution, if that were to happen, wouldn't be so that we create more ex-Muslims, or I guess in that point there wouldn't be an ex-Muslim because they wouldn't have been a Muslim to begin with.
Yeah.
But no, it'd just be more in general. Like I hope that I can raise a well-adjusted person to have well-adjusted contributions to the world, not really my camp.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, if we can just move on then, I think, to the next companion of Muhammad. So, this is Hamza. And Hamza was Muhammad's uncle, also a great warrior, and also someone. There's going to be a little bit of a trend here, especially after we talked about Omar as well in the last one. He was a violent person, an aggressive person. Uh, and I mean, I suppose it makes sense that that kind of region would, and that kind of life would create people like him. And so I actually don't know much about Hamza. I don't know about you. Uh, all I really know is that he loved Muhammad when they were growing up, and he was very protective of him, and that's about it. And he died relatively early on. He died in, I think, the Battle of Uhud. There's a very famous anecdote. I think it's him, of his liver being eaten by or being bitten into by the wife of Abu Sufyan, who was one of the leaders of the enemies of Islam, one of the leaders of Quraysh. And
Isn't
so
it
he was,
convenient that the enemies are always like brutal and inhumane and burying their daughters and eating organs and yeah,
well,
I
here's
don't
the
know.
interesting thing about that. Abu Sufyan and his wife, the woman who did that to Hamza, converted to Islam, and they were accepted into the fold as well after Quraysh was defeated. So that also kind of made me, when I was young, think, wow, Islam is this amazing thing where even people who do such horrific, brutal acts, killing and mutilating the
Cannibalism.
organs of Muhammad's own family, and he took them into the fold of Islam. It's amazing in a way, if it's true. I mean,
Yeah. It's a great glow up. Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, okay. So let's see this hadith. So this one is a bit long. I'm gonna try to kind of. I think it might actually be worth going through the whole thing just so we can kind of understand the concept. So I want people to keep in mind as well that this is categorized about the obligation of giving a portion of your booty to the cause of Allah. You can't just keep all of your war booty. That's unacceptable.
That's
You have
like the
to.
winnings from the war, the stuff that you took from the other tribe and so on. To explain
Yes.
the meaning of that word, booty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's hear the story. So
Including
narrated.
actual booty, right? Like actual
y-
humans. That's part of the
Actual,
meaning of booty.
I mean, I guess someone had to make that joke, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, so this is from Ali. I got a she camel in my share of the booty on the day of the Battle of Badr, which is one of the first. I think it's the first battle that the first Muslims fought against Quraysh, and the Prophet had given me a she camel from the booty, the share of the booty. When I intended to marry Fatima, the daughter of Allah's apostle, I had an appointment with blah 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 blah. Let's just skip through this. So I was collecting for my she camels equipment of saddles, sacks, ropes, while my two she camels were kneeling down beside the room of an Ansari man. And the Ansar are the people who are living in Medina, which is the city that Muhammad fled to after he was expelled from Mecca. Anyway, I returned after collecting whatever I collected to see the humps of my two she camels cut off and their flanks cut open, and some portion of their livers was taken out. So that's pretty horrifying. That was something that was not in the Message movie, and
Wait, was the camel alive or something?
I'm I mean, I'm pretty sure they were dead, right?
Yeah, okay. All right,
Okay.
well, they're just like cutting up meat, I guess. Okay.
So when I saw that state, so Ali is saying, when I saw that state of my two she camels, I could not help weeping. So even Ali, the brutal man who would burn people alive, clearly
No,
had
no, I
his
think
limits.
the correction was Ali might have said, I wouldn't have done that. I think it may have been Omar who burned them. T-
Um, no,
I
no,
think.
no. It was Ali.
It was Ali? Okay.
Yeah. So Ali, of course, I guess he was more of an animal lover than an apostate lover. Who has done this? And the people replied, Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet, who's staying with some Ansari drunks in this house. So he went and basically told the Prophet what happened, and the Prophet said, "What's wrong with you?" And he tells him what happened. He attacked my two she camels, cut off their humps, and ripped open their flanks. And he's sitting there in a house in the company of some drunks. So let's see what the Prophet did. Let's see our moral guide for all times and places. The Prophet did in this case. So he set out walking, followed by Ali and another companion, till he came to the house where Hamza was, and he asked permission to enter. And they were all drunk in there. And so the Prophet started rebuking Hamza for what he had done, but Hamza was drunk, his eyes were red. And everyone remember that drinking is forbidden at this point within Islam. Muslims are not supposed to be drinking.
Shouldn't he be punished with al-had then?
Well, I'm going to get to that in a
Sorry,
second. You're
sorry,
going to
sorry.
see. You're going to see. So Hamza looked at Allah's messenger, and then he raised his eyes, looking at his knees. Then he raised up his eyes, looking at his umbilicus. I don't know what that is. And again, he raised up his eyes to look in his face. And Hamza then said, "Aren't you but the slaves of my father?" And Muhammad realized that he was drunk, and so Muhammad retreated, and we went out with him. So that's how the story ends. Our role model, Muhammad, was basically, so this is an insult. Aren't you but the slaves of my father? From Hamza, drunkenly insulting Muhammad. And what Muhammad does is he goes, well, he's drunk, and he just leaves. So, I mean, this story is so incredible on so many levels, but let's just start talking about the horrific action of Hamza. Why? Like, I mean, the story doesn't explain why he did this. In my research, one theory I found was that Hamza was jealous of Ali's elevated status and position with Muhammad. He's marrying Muhammad's daughter, and he's clearly cherished and beloved by Muhammad. And Hamza is an old, jealous man. So that's one version I've heard, not saying that this is the definitive version. That's one explanation for why he did it. I guess another explanation was he was drunk, when you do sometimes you do crazy
I
things when
don't
you're drunk.
know. I've never done something like that before, so I can't say. I don't know. I don't know how people use that excuse of, oh, they were drunk, they're out of their mind. No, no. I feel like people would need to have that impulse to do something, and their inhibition is lowered when they're drunk. So I'm just saying, a super peaceful person would get drunk and not, kill two camels that don't belong to him.
And it's just like in such a brutal way. Like, I mean, anyone who, even if you're not an animal lover, it's just like when I was reading that story, just like I couldn't help but just like visually imagine that happening. And such an interesting thing in this is that Ali is the victim in this story, when he's the villain in the other hadiths that we discussed last time. I should
Well,
also
not the
mention.
villain. He made a mistake. He made an innocent ijtihad mistake. I shared a link. It was Ali, Abu Bakr, and Khalid bin Walid, according to this link.
Mhm.
And what's funny is I didn't have time to read it right now on the stream, but from the first part of it, the answer is either it's a da'if hadith, or either or it's sahih, but they were doing it as ijtihad. This wasn't told to
Okay.
them to do. So either way, like, it's just they're not painted as villains. They were too enthusiastic. They shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Man, I've got a lot of thoughts, and I can see already how this could be spun to be a pro-Islam story. As in, look at how forgiving the Prophet is. Look at how one could change their
His
life
grace,
around.
yeah,
Yeah.
his respect
But
for
I
an
can
elder as well.
his res-
I don't know. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
um, yeah. You mean playing a Muslim apologist, devil's advocate? It's exchangeable. Um, and you know what it reminds me of? It's like a jealous ex who destroys the car of a
Yeah.
person. That's yeah. But I can tell you what I'm thinking the actual narrative is, with the same exact events.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Um, do you have any thoughts on that before I
No, 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 no. Go
preach?
ahead, please.
So this guy is just beneficial for the prophet. This guy, like I said earlier, I was making it as a joke that some of these people, the prophet they would just join the prophet's side because it's the winning side, and they can gain more that way, and they could do more with their leadership.
It's interesting
Um,
that you say that. Remember that for later on. Please continue.
okay, am I a prophet? Am I predicting things that are anyway? Um, for context, him and I, like Secular Spirit and I, we have not discussed these hadiths before.
No,
Some of them I've never even some of them I haven't heard of, just because I haven't gone digging for the brutal ones. Anyhow, here's what I think of when I hear that story. This guy is a belligerent person who doesn't even respect Islam or the Prophet. He may say that in other contexts. He may say that in other hadith and so on. And he's painted as one of the Prophet's loyalist companions, probably. Is he one of the people who are Mubashirin bil Jannah? I'm not sure. I don't remember uh, who they
not
are,
sure either.
but anyway, all that aside, he has high status in Islam, right? Like he's a respectable companion of the Prophet. But in reality, the Prophet was maybe even afraid of him. Like in that moment, the Prophet he didn't really know how to restrain this man who just did something brutal and is drunk right now. It's simpler to just let him sleep it off, and then tomorrow he's going to come to his senses and realize this is not a good strategic move for him to do. Um, because the prophet doesn't seem like a person whose words, like, they're respected by some people, but by some other people it seems like he doesn't carry that much authority. He can't stand up for himself. Like that infamous verse where Allah had to tell the people, don't loiter around his house because that hurts him. فَذَلِكَ يُؤْذِيهِ, or something like that. Can't you just tell your guests, like, hey guys, like, I can very easily tell my friends, guys, get the hell out, like I want to go sleep, because we're that close, right? And it wouldn't even come to that because my friends would be understanding. But if I am in a position of authority on top of that, right, and they're my companions, they're my disciples, if you want to call it that, they're my followers, I can very easily tell them, hey, I would appreciate it if you leave now because I'm tired and I want to go to bed, or because I want the privacy of my home. But he had to get Allah to do it for him. Like every time there's some conflict, Allah has to do it for him. So in this situation, he could have gotten Allah to say something after a while, but I don't know if he didn't want to overuse it because it would get suspicious, or if he truly actually has delusions that Allah is defending him, or that he thinks it's not a good move to turn this person against him completely. So I'll just take a hit and let it, pass. But whatever happened is, does it say that this camel was hit on the neck? Like, was it killed Islamically before being,
It doesn't really say. It just says he cut off their humps.
right? So that, I mean, based on what we know, it doesn't seem like it was killed humanely. I don't know, but that's just a speculation. But whatever it was, we never see in these hadiths any consequences. We don't see any actual straight up saying, don't do this again, or this was bad, don't do it again. The most we see is, God, I am innocent of this. I didn't ask for this. So that's my thoughts on that.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Just to take a look at the comments. So, Robert, hi, Robert, thanks for joining. So, Robert shares what the umbilicus is: the depression in the center of the surface of the
I
abdomen.
think it says surra. It's the belly button.
In the
Right?
Arabic version.
Yeah, I think it says surra, and that's what that is. That's where the umbilical cord is, and that's where it gets cut, and
Oh
that's
yeah,
called the
here it
belly
is.
button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, that's not really important, but thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
And Nazone75 says, I've been drunk and I agree. Worst thing I ever did drunk was kiss a stray dog.
I
uh,
mean,
you've never
that's
sliced
horrible.
off the hump of a camel?
No, no, but don't do that either. Come on.
Yes, please don't. And Coco Jasmine says Muhammad used Allah only for his pleasures. I don't think he cared about power that much. It's hard to speculate on Muhammad's personality really when it comes to things like that. What we can only really do is see what Muslims believe Muhammad was like in stories like this, or what the first
And to be
Muslims
clear,
believed.
like I'm not implying that he's at least like based on this hadith, I'm not saying he's so power hungry that he wanted to be as like all that. No, it's like he still wants some kind of power for the ummah, even if it's kind of
Yeah.
selfless and not him. Like it's a strategic move, kind of. And also, he doesn't have the spine or the actual. Uh, he's not respected to that extent. I think, like the fact that this guy who's already a Muslim can tell him can get drunk right against his orders and can tell him, "Didn't we own you? Like, don't forget yourself." And just nothing comes out of it. Like
Nothing
this
comes
guy's
out of
not.
it.
Yeah, after
So,
he's already committed whatever he did before joining Islam. Yeah.
exactly. So I wanted to discuss one more thing about this. And so, as is related in the hadith, Hamza was drunk. He was with a bunch of drunks who are all Muslim. And I wanted to show you this hadith that outlines what Muhammad did to other drunks. So, and this is in the limits and punishments set by Allah. What is the punishment for drunkenness? As we can see from this story, the Prophet lashed a drunk with date leaf stalks and shoes. As for Abu Bakr, he gave a drunk 40 lashes. So, one thing to notice here is, or a question to ask here, were these punishments meted out to Hamza in that hadith? Doesn't seem
It
like
doesn't
it.
seem that way. And if it was, it would be a bigger event that would be mentioned elsewhere. Like it would be an example of how, see, nobody is above being punished. That would have been a more interesting outcome. It would still be messed up that it happened and that this guy still held status, but at least we would have seen some consequence. But it doesn't seem that way at all.
Yeah, it almost feels an incomplete story in a way. Like what happened? Like what? And the whole ridiculous thing, as I mentioned in the beginning, was that the point that the categorization of this hadith has nothing to do with these horrific things in it. Has nothing to do with Hamza being drunk, for him massacring those camels, or him insulting the Prophet. It has to do with how to like the obligations of sharing your war booty. It's
See,
bizarre.
and here's the thing, like, what did we learn from that hadith? Because he didn't respect the obligations of sharing the war booty, right? He did it. He got jealous and he killed. He actually destroyed the war booty. That so he did the opposite
Yeah,
of it.
well, it kind of just mentions it a little bit briefly, so I guess that's how it works as an example of you're
No, I'm
supposed to
sorry.
do
Like,
this.
where's the respect part here? That
Oh,
like was he reprimanded for it?
no, no, no. Well, that's what I'm
It
saying. Like most of the content of the hadith has nothing to do with the war booty. Like the war booty is just like an incidental detail in the story.
I mean, even if we focus on the war booty part and just leave everything else, and this is the thing, you'll see me conceding a lot in these because I'm really trying to make it make sense. So if we concede, okay, all the other irrelevant parts, did we see a conclusion where the prophet was like, "This is you shouldn't have done that, and this is what you deserve in punishment, or you should be respecting"? No, he just said, I don't know. Did he even say anything before the other guy insulted him?
No, no, he did not. It
Because
basically
he's
just
spineless. Because
he
he's
just tries to
spineless.
talk to him, and when he realizes he can't talk to him because he's drunk, he just leaves.
I my theory is because he doesn't have the charisma or authority or power or respect to be able to say anything influential or consequential here. Because if he did after the guy sobered up, we would have heard about it. But yeah, to your point about how the classification often has nothing to do with the actual event, there was this hadith about this woman being beaten till her skin was green. And the conclusion is the prophet didn't do anything about it. If anything, he kind of victim blamed. But the classification of it was women are allowed to wear green because Aisha was saying it's as green as this garment that I'm wearing. And that's the classification. That's the lesson here. It's about what can women wear, and green is allowed. So thank freaking God for that. And it shows you the mentality of like, okay, if it's not the intended event, right? That's not the intention of the event. It's the mentality of those scholars that we trust to put down this stuff. Like if they say the narrative is that Islam wasn't corrupted, and if we presume that the pure Islam is what came down, then it's already been corrupted by the people narrating it. Yeah.
Yeah, and an interesting point here by Neo 26. I think the biggest problem with hadiths are the lack of facial expressions and body language. Social interactions are more complex than the mere spoken words. And that makes sense. And this is something that I actually think that a lot of Islamic scholars would argue that you need to have all this context to really properly understand the hadith. Because if you just look at the words, you're gonna miss a lot of things. But how did we get to this point where we're looking at these 1400-year-old quotations that were collected hundreds of years after they were said and judging them as the basis for everything in our lives? That's my question, really.
I'm thinking of an example. Imagine if somebody took a transcript of a live stream that I had and they just took a small section of it. And in that section, I said to the guest, "Get the hell out." Does that mean that I was joking with the guest saying, "Get the hell out of here"? Or was I saying, "Get
Exactly.
the hell off my stream"? Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like if I was presenting that, if I knew that this is how my stream was going to be presented to people, it's my fault for using that media and not choosing my words more carefully.
Completely agree. But yeah, anything you want to add about this one before we move on to our last companion?
Horrible, and I've learned a lesson here. It's that, yeah, Islam is a mess.
Yeah, and this is something that I think is worth mentioning to people who are questioning Islam, who are still Muslim, or even just Muslims who happen to be watching this. It's a good idea to just look into these things for yourself, because I didn't know any of these. I mean, I knew about the story of Khalid ibn Walid and what he did to that one tribe, but I didn't know a lot of the hadiths that we talked about in last month's video or in this one when I was Muslim. And I think it will benefit you, if you're a Muslim, to just learn more about it, even if you want to stick to your faith. And that's something that's sadly very lacking, whether it's lack of time, lack of education, uh, but the information is out there more than ever before.
You know what my biggest issue here with this stuff is, or as a Muslim, what my biggest issue would be? Most Muslims don't know these events, and when they do know them, they have to make up some kind of excuse or way to dismiss them. But the biggest issue is how, if you go down to the basics, if you put aside all the apologetics, all the like sugarcoating, if you actually go, and I'm not just talking about Salafis, I'm talking about, for example, when people go to Al Azhar for advice, like that's
Yeah.
an authority. If you go to there, you will find reasons and justifications and explanations that aren't saying this didn't happen. And that's where you realize the ugliness of the underlying, basis, the foundation, the truth about this religion. It's not a commentary on all Muslims. I think Muslims would be horrified seeing this event unfold. And if they do make excuses, it's because of cognitive dissonance and wanting to make sense of their image of Islam in their head and this reality. So yeah, try to understand it, and you realize it's, by all explanations, it's horrible.
Well said. And so let's talk about our last companion. And this is a bit more of a relatively speaking, a lighthearted end after talking about camels being massacred and people being executed and all that. So Abu Hurairah. So the name, I don't know, how would you loosely translate it? Like the lover, like Abu, like the father of cats. It's like a pet name in a sense. So I figured of all of the companions, of course, Aladdin, you would like this person the most. He's a cat lover.
I should actually, because people have called me Abu Huraira or Abu Huraira 10 because I've got two cats. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'll turn it to you. Like, what do you know about him? What did you like about him, if anything?
Honestly, not that much. Like it's the thing is, I tried to focus back in the day. I tried to focus on the prophet and the other prophets, because those are the people who had the message, right? The
Yeah.
actions of the others, as Muslims love to say, are fallible. Or I mean, everyone's human, but they're more fallible. So I didn't care, also because of a lot of these lessons that we were being taught, lessons about bravery, about these situations, were not only irrelevant to our lives today. Like it's not, you can't even extrapolate that wisdom, even though the situation is different, and apply it today. Like, what do I need to be brave about in my life as a teenager, or even now? It's a lot of things that have nothing to do with a sword. It's a lot of things that have nothing to do with the boldness, because of the truth. I mean, these lessons weren't useful in that, learning them in that format. So to me, I had less interest in that, and one could only learn about so many things, and more in what the prophets have taught us. But all that aside, a lot of these lessons sometimes didn't make sense in any context. Like I don't want to give examples now and derail it, but it's just, even if we follow through in that situation, that's not a good outcome. So not much attention I paid to Abu Huraira.
For me personally, I didn't know much about him. It's just so as part of my Islamic education growing up, we had to memorize a lot of hadiths, and sure enough, this guy's name came up pretty often as the narrator, and he's one of the most prolific narrators of the hadith. The number of hadiths that he's the source for are numbers in the thousands, and he was known for having an excellent memory, photographic memory, actually, I believe, and he's considered one of the most reliable narrators, which we're going to find, which is interesting, as we're going to find in a second. And so I found this really. I wasn't really looking for this specifically when I was doing my research, but I just stumbled upon this hadith and I thought it was kind of interesting. So let's take a look. So sure enough, it's narrated by him, the man himself. Um, I used to accompany Allah's messenger to fill my stomach, and that was when I did not eat baked bread nor wear silk. Neither a male nor a female slave used to serve me. Aww. And I
Mm.
used to bind stones over my belly and ask somebody to recite a Quranic verse for me, though I knew it. So that, I mean, he had photographic memory, obviously, so that he might take me to his house and feed me. And so and then he explains this example of one of the Sahaba, I believe, was very kind to the poor and used to take us and feed us with whatever was available in his house. And you get the gist of it. He used to give us the empty honey or butter skin, which we would tear and lick whatever was in it. So this was someone who was down in hard times. It seems like he was living in poverty, and then Islam came along, and well, in his own words, he would hang around the Prophet, he would hang around Muslims and talk about Islam related things with them so he could get food. So before I share my opinion, I was wondering if I could just get your spontaneous first reaction to this hadith. What do you think?
My first reaction was the slave part,
It's just
because
kind
of
of
how.
incidentally thrown in there. Oh,
Yeah, he's like, "I was so poor, I didn't even have a slave." It's like someone saying, "I didn't even have a car." Like
yeah.
in a place where everybody has a car, you know? Like it's in that context, you just it's not like having a butler. It's not that fancy of a thing. It's like, "Oh, I didn't even have a slave. That's how poor I was." And it bothers me not like now you understand the context of the time and the places they like to say like it was such a normal thing. But the fact that Islam didn't highlight how it's not a normal thing, how it's kind of fucked up actually. And like you shouldn't want to have a lot of slaves. We're just doing this because it's how things are done. None of that is said in Islam. It's still seen as like in heaven you're going to have ghilman mukhalladun, like young servants, slaves. It's still seen as a good thing. It's still seen as a fact of life. And that bothered me that even in a Sahabi's mind, it was so casual to him that he was going to continue having slaves. Like I'm sure he did have slaves, and a good Muslim would have slaves going forward. Like that's what their mentality of Islam was. The Prophet would be horrified to learn how diluted Islam is today, like or how different things are. Wait, you don't have slaves? Wait, are you that weak of an ummah? Like, have you guys not been doing the context conquests that I've been asking for? Where are the Umars of this nation? Um,
It's
so
also
that's the first
possible
thought.
that if he was in this time, he might be just like, you know what? I'm just gonna I'm just gonna watch TV. I'm just gonna Netflix and chill. I don't know.
He would become a stoner, man. He would just he would just be like in his
So
own thoughts all
that
the
was
time.
that was Aladdin saying that, not me, for anyone watching. So direct your hate mail towards him.
Right here. You know where to find me. My channel is going to be in the description and stuff. No, but
Exactly.
see, okay, yeah, nobody take this out on him. Seriously, like this is my thought process. Is the guy? It doesn't seem to be very brave or anything, right? You can say that it's bravery that he endured the so-called bullying of Quraysh for years, right? Because always the victim, but in situations among his own people, he doesn't react in a way that a leader should react in to be a qudwa, right? To be a leader, a good example. So I feel like his personality in today's world would not gain much traction at all. He would just be some guy who has to like recluse into his own thoughts, and that's one outcome of it. He'd just keep talking to God that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Like my first thought about this was it made me think about when we talk about a cult or whatever, like a fringe religion, what always tends to happen is that you get all of these people attached to it who, they want a piece of the power that the cult leader has. They want to reap some of the benefits. And it's still kind of hard for me to conceptualize that happening in Islam as well, just because I was Muslim for so long, but it seems very plausible that this happened with Islam too. Like all of these people, as we've discussed in earlier in the video, maybe Hamza only converted for some sort of advantage. Maybe Khalid just realized, oh, these Muslims make a better army. That's just a joke. But there could have been so many motivations. And the story I mentioned earlier of Abu Sufyan, who was like a strident, bitter enemy of Islam, converting. Did he convert because he saw the truth and beauty of Islam? Or did he do it for political reasons or because he knew he was defeated and if he didn't, he might get killed? And so this is just another example that I felt like it's so fascinating that he doesn't even mince his words. Abu Hurairah, he says literally, I just used to accompany Muhammad to fill my stomach. I'm not saying that he didn't believe or that he didn't practice Islam and all that. It's just, it raises the question of how many people like Abu Hurairah did this for reasons beyond actually believing in Islam.
Well, it's easy to say he doesn't say that he only did it for the food, but he would follow around the Prophet more often
Yeah.
because it was a source of food. But yeah, one would expect him to say, I guess, I love the Prophet so much that I would always follow him around, or I wanted to learn or whatever. But I won't hold that against him that much. But what you said about wanting to, like in a cult and wanting to get closer to power, that's absolutely true from a lot of these hadiths that we've seen. But even a more charitable interpretation of this situation would be people who are down on their luck, who are in difficult situations, who join these cults because they embrace them, because they help them, um, and they eventually end up believing in whatever it is the cult is touting, or maybe they don't believe in it, but they're like, I've heard a lot of these stories, like they joined a commune because they were homeless and they had no other option. This kind of rings true here, right? He's saying that he had nothing to eat, had no slaves for him, and that's part of why he was following the Prophet around. So it's not about the truthfulness of it. And one comment about that truthfulness of it, Surah An-Nasr. It's a very short surah. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح. If God's victory comes in Fath Mecca, right, the conquest of Mecca, وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. You see the people enter God's religion in droves or in groups. Why are they suddenly entering in groups? Is it because the truth is suddenly clear to them? Or because of the disadvantages of not converting and being taken over and being taken as slaves and possibly killed on a whim because the Sahabi decided it. So there's less about truthfulness and more about the political climate and the reality of life for those people. Like they can not care about the truth and still follow Islam because that's their one life that they have. Like they just want to survive. Yeah.
Yeah, which really shattered the bubble when I started realizing these things. This really shattered the bubble in my head I had of like burst the bubble of the perfection of these Sahaba. Like it really did destroy it. And so why why would Abu Huraira, let's say he did have photographic memory. What if he didn't? What could he
What
possibly
about the
benefit?
others who don't? I mean, since he was the only
That's a
one in
fair
the
point.
chain, I guess, who had photographic memory, what about the rest?
That's a very good question. But the thing that like it brings to mind is it possible that he made up some of those hadiths just so he could receive more benefits and more prosperity within the Islamic empire, even after the death of the
That applies to
prophets?
everyone, right? That
Mm.
applies to all these narrators, or the primary narrators at least, or even past that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I knew of a few things about Abu Huraira that I couldn't find the original source for because these were things I learned about or read, talking about 15 years ago. But there are some anecdotes that a lot of the elevated Sahaba that we already talked about, especially, were not very happy with how many hadiths Abu Huraira was churning out. as we said, he was churning them out in the thousands. And I found this thing here that I wanted to just share. If I can just pull it up, just give me a moment. And this is coming from Omar's reaction towards Abu Hurairah. So let's take a look. Let me just pull it up here.
Oh, to give an analogy about the photographic memory thing, if I were to tell you something or show you something, and you have a photographic memory, but you got to show your friend, who's got to show a friend, who's got to show a friend, and then eventually make it a video, then even if you have photographic memory, it doesn't matter. Like, okay, one
Yeah.
one piece of the link is fine, but
Well, it's like, like that game, I think it's called Telephone. It's the same kind of idea
Yeah.
that even something happening with people in the same room in the same couple of seconds can completely get distorted. So in that sense, it is completely irrelevant. But let's take a look. So this is from islamquest.net. One thing I should mention is that these Islamic websites aren't always reliable, but what I was reading here rung a bell with what I had learned about Abu Hurairah. So let's take a quick read. As for Umar punishing Abu Hurairah as a result of him forging hadiths, one must say, first of all, it is true that although Abu Hurairah accompanied the Prophet for only a year and 9 months, he has narrated more hadiths from him than any other of the Prophet's companions.
More than Aisha?
That is one detail I'm not sure it's true, but what matters is that he did recite thousands and thousands of them. He narrated thousands and thousands of them.
Wait,
So-
is the term photographic memory, did you read that? Like, because none of this was written down, right? So this is all
No.
audiographic?
Yeah, audiographic, I guess, is he just had
Okay.
a great memory. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the better way of describing it. So
Pretty
just to
sus.
continue. The tremendous amounts of hadiths by Abu Hurairah worried Umar to the extent that he whipped him and told him, "Oh, Abu Hurairah, you narrate far too many hadiths from the Prophet. I'm afraid that you will lie about him." He then warned him that if he doesn't give up narrating, he'll be sent to exile. Hence, most of narrations belong to after Umar's death.
Wow, that's when
because
the
it was
inspiration
after
came.
him that he wasn't afraid anymore. He himself would admit, "I am narrating hadiths for you that if I was to narrate at his time, I would be whipped."
I really want to take a look at the sources here, like after the stream. I really want to dive into this.
So had you ever heard any of this stuff before?
Of course not. Of course
Really?
not, because no, I had not heard that. And keep in mind, like, the average Muslim has heard even less and less.
True.
So this would really raise a lot of questions. That's a very fantastic point. I do want to look into, did he narrate more than Aisha? Because that would blow my mind, because the Prophet spent more time with her than
She
any
lived
other
with him.
wife.
She was his wife for 9 years, I think, or 9 years after consummation. Let's not get into that stuff.
Yeah. He spent so much time with her, and she has a great memory. They say, like, that's one of the reasons why she was the one. All of that, and this guy somehow turns out more hadiths than anybody else. And you know what's funny is when you say Abu Hurairah, in my mind, because of how many times I've heard it in khutbahs or whatever, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. Like, right away, it's like, that's how many times I've heard it. And that signifies that he's trusted in the Muslim community, and he's trusted by all the scholars that cite him. So I've heard his name so many times, and yet somehow it's so suspicious that he has more hadith than anybody else. And the other comment I had in mind is how casual it is that Omar just suspects it. He has no proof, therefore he will lash him, just in case.
Just in case.
Those are the most trusted men, right? The men who...
It does fit his personality. Like, you can't say, "Oh, I'm really shocked and surprised that he did that."
Omar? Oh my. My pearls. No, Omar, how could you do this? No, yeah.
By the way, while you were talking, I did take a cursory look at how many hadiths are narrated by Aisha, and it's this is from Wikipedia, so not the most reliable, but it's not even close. It's like 2,000, around 2,000, and Abu Hurairah is around the 5,000 range.
Wow, the guy's working overtime, remembering things. I guess the Prophet was just chatty around Abu Hurairah. You just purr around him, just start purring hadith.
So yeah, I mean, I again, as I mentioned, I can't tell you exactly where I first learned about this. I think it might even been something that my father told me about, and he's a lover of Islam's history, and it is a story that's been around. And there's another incident about Amr and Abu Hurairah that I wanted to mention, and this is something from another maybe not wholly reliable Muslim website. It's kind of tough to find stuff about this. So let me pull it up here. Okay. So an incident between the two of them about public money. So the story basically goes that during Omar's reign, when Abu Hurairah was appointed as governor of Bahrain, he was accused of having stolen from the treasury, the public treasury. And so Abu Hurairah denied this, and Umar said, "So how did you accumulate this wealth of 10,000 dirhams?" And so this is someone who, as we saw in the earlier hadith, uh, would bind his stomach with stones. And I guess we didn't talk about that, but I guess that's a way of
The
reducing the
prophet is
hunger
said to have done
pains.
that too. Yeah, like I don't know how it works. I'm not gonna question it. Fine.
Okay. Anyway, so I guess someone was very suspicious. Like, how did you get all of this money? Like, where are you getting all of this stuff from? So anyway,
Dawah.
so this article basically says that this is inaccurate. That um, Abu Hurairah was removed from his position of power because he stole the public treasury. But I think what's interesting about the story is that these kinds of anecdotes were around. It's one of those cases where could there be an element of truth to something even though it's not wholly true, or is there some sort of truth being revealed by the story even though it's completely not true? It's kind of in the same way that even myths and legends that we know aren't true have an element of truth about that says something about the society that created them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's difficult to say because we don't even know the verifiable methods, right? The ones that we so-called trust. Even those, we don't really know the truthfulness of them. So objectively, it's hard to say what happened. But I like when I'm operating, when I'm thinking about this, I think from within, like as a Muslim would think. If we just presume that this is trustworthy on this side of the aisle, what still bothers me, thinking again within the context of Islam is how, of course, they say that only the Quran is preserved, everything else is just not necessarily preserved. But what if you are one of the people who, before the age of the internet, only heard one version of it for multiple trusted people in your community? You had no way of going to another community or sending a letter even to another city to ask the other imam. It was just, this is the reality of Islam that was taught to you. And you learn that in that situation where you suspect someone is lying about stealing the money of the community, you can lash them or whatever it may be. Not that this story said that, but you just learn these lessons and then you apply them and people get harmed. Who's making up for all of that? Allah on the day of judgment is going to be like, okay, so 99% of Muslims misunderstood me and they've harmed so many people among themselves and among others. I'm going to just give everybody more reward to like cancel everything out. What was the point of all of this? Like,
That's, I think you just hit the nail on the head of what's like one of the most fundamental questions of why I left Islam. What is the point of all of this? Like, what is the agenda? How is this all sorted out? It seems like such a mess, and I just didn't buy the whole rationale of trust in God. He knows best. He knows we are limited in our knowledge. Yeah, it does deserve an eye roll. Uh,
what what is he saying? I would trust in God if God was like, I'd have no choice but to trust in God because like he would absolutely know more than me and he could be deceiving me, but what choice would I have? But here we don't even know what God is. Like this is just people telling us that people said that people said
yeah,
that God.
as Islam critic says, apart from Abu Huraira having so many hadiths, a bigger question is, did he ever exist, and if he really said that stuff? Which I think is an interesting point because, and Hassan Radwan kind of adds to this, it's that the hadith is a useful indicator of Muslim beliefs, but unreliable as a historical source. So I think that's interesting because we did talk about this in part one, where we're not looking at these things as these are all historical facts. What's important is that within Islamic tradition and within the beliefs of so many Muslims around the world, this stuff is fact. And I think that's what's most important. And the fact that it's so suspect doesn't mean that, oh, maybe the companions, Muhammad's companions, were all very great people, actually. And the stuff is all misleading. Just trust in the Quran. You know, there's the Quranist Muslims. But that's the completely detaching ourselves from the reality that a lot of Islamic tradition is built on the hadith, and the hadith includes stories like this.
Yeah, this kind of helps me sometimes distance myself from the thought that this many people were actually harmed in these hadiths, like real humans were harmed, and that's why I'm able to make jokes about it, to relieve that tension. Because
What
do you
else
really
can we
want to
do?
think? Yeah, like they're already dead. Do you really want to think about the horrificness of it all the time? You would end up not discussing these topics, and that happens to me sometimes. I get way too depressed doing research for something, thinking about how, like, this could be more than a story. This could have actually happened to someone. But the way that we joke about it and we just treat it as a story is the way to cope with that. And yeah, like everybody's been saying, it's not a commentary on the truthfulness of this actually happening, but if people believe it happened and they operate with that belief, that's what needs to be addressed. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Well said. So, yeah, that brings us to the end of our discussion on the Sahaba. So, end of part 2. If anyone wants to watch part 1, I left a link in the video description. So, that one is a bit juicier, a bit meatier, a bit more horrifying and disturbing. I did leave a question in the live chat for basically what people think about the 3 Sahaba we talked about today. Which of these 3 companions of Muhammad is the worst person? Just taking a look at the polls so far. So Abu Hurairah 4%, Hamza 12%, and with the vast majority, Khalid ibn Walid 85%. So apparently, people in the live chat aren't that upset by cutting off the humps of camels. All right,
I
not
mean,
many animal lovers in there.
you gotta prioritize how much horrificness has happened, right? So
True.
like you gotta put it in tiers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm just joking, by the way, for anyone
yeah,
watching.
yeah.
um, so, one last thing we wanted to do, and I did promise people in the live chat this, is that we would take some questions. And do you have about 10 minutes or so, 15
Yeah,
minutes to do that? Okay,
yeah.
awesome. All right, I did save some of them, but anyone who's watching, please feel free to leave your questions and we'll
Also,
try to get
like
to
and
them.
subscribe and stuff. Don't, because
Thank
I
you.
forget to do that when I'm watching other
I
people's
should do that in
videos.
the beginning, shouldn't I? I should just
Yeah,
say it right
you
off the
should.
bat. I know.
You're being
I'm
a
working
bad
on it.
YouTuber right now.
I'm working on it. Yeah. So let's take a look at a few of the questions. So this one was from Khalid Doodles in the beginning, if you remember.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if this is something you want to talk about. I can kind of just quickly explain
I
my
can give
thoughts and
my short
feelings.
answer first.
Go ahead.
Like, all I'm gonna say is I don't want to comment on something like this just because I don't want it to be taken as advice or the opposite. So yeah, all I'm gonna say is just be careful with whatever substance or mind altering substance you use. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, for anyone just listening, not watching. So the question was, what's your guys' take on psychedelics? So my personal view on this is uh, that it is something taking psychedelics is something that is demonized by a lot of governments, by a lot of law books in the world, and I think that has ulterior motives beyond just protecting people. So this is just my personal opinion, and I think it's like many things where it's a tool. It can cause harm if abused and overused, and it could potentially have some benefits. I know anecdotal stories where people have benefited from an experience on, if I want to specify something, like mushrooms. And there's actually growing scientific evidence that could be beneficial for people who are terminally ill, for example. In the case of Canada, there's been some cases where there's been exemptions given to terminally ill patients to allow them to take psychedelics to help them cope with the trauma of what they're going through. And this is something that's probably going to continue and expand in the future in Canada. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in other countries as well. So, as for my personal experience, I have taken mushrooms, And the best way I could describe it in a nutshell, again, not recommending that you do it, uh, but decide for yourself, is that it opens up new perspectives than the ones you currently have. That could be a bad thing, that could be a good thing. And it really depends on your mindset when you do it. So, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Next question. This one was from Robert. So this question I think was for me because I talked about how I had to memorize the hadiths in school. So did I have to learn the hadiths verbatim or just summaries? So the way they had the curriculum set up was you would have a textbook and they would have a curated selection of excerpts from the Quran as well as curated hadiths. And I think partially just to show some mercy on us because we had to memorize several over the course of the semester. The hadiths were typically on the short side, so we had to memorize them verbatim. And we would then be given oral exams where we had to recite them in front of the classroom. And depending on how well you did, you would get marks taken off if you made a mistake. And we would also have to write them down during exams as well. So that's kind of the Middle Eastern style of education that I experienced, where it's just a lot of memorizing and then regurgitating. Yep. And to be honest with you, today, many, many years later, I don't think I can remember a single one verbatim that I memorized in all those times. It was one of those things where I think anyone can relate to this. You just cram for an exam and then you forget it the moment
Yeah.
exam's over. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't memorize hadiths, but when I was memorizing Quran, uh, I went a couple of times to this halaqa, this Quran memorizing circle in a masjid that was nearby, and um, the way that I learned Islam and the Quran was not with a Saudi sheikh. It was not related to however the Saudis learned and taught it. So in that case, it was a Saudi sheikh in a Saudi masjid, and everyone around me was Saudi. I was the only one not in a thobe, not wearing the traditional thobe. I felt so out of place because I was just like in pants and a t-shirt. Um, not that they were like making me feel bad about it. I was just too young and too inside my own head, right? Anxious. Anyway, and the way that they memorized was actually by like they had to, instead of just recite, they had to write down verses. And I found that to be so like hardcore compared to me just memorizing them, because I had to remember not just the pronunciation and tartil and tajweed, and also
Yeah.
remember the letters and the intricacies of it. I don't think they had to do it with tashkil, thankfully, like with all the harakat, like um, the for the English speakers, like the symbols on top and below the letters and so on. But yeah, some people they invest so much time and energy and attention into memorizing these things verbatim, and I feel sad for them because a lot of their life is spent like even if you just want to memorize the Quran, it doesn't have to be to that extent. But a lot of them never even chose to be in that position, and they just end up in it. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Next question. So this is from Jojo Freelancer KUP. Question for both of us. Be honest, guys. Was Islam a logical religion for you guys? I mean, the concept of Tawheed to humanity. I think it is hard for Muslims to leave Islam. It was for me. Aladdin, you want to go first?
What does logical religion mean, though? Because I feel like those two are kind of oxymorons sometimes.
I, I suppose he's saying, did Islam make logical sense to you?
Well, I don't say that as as a a hitch slap or something, but seriously, like a religion involves freeing yourself from logic in some situations and just trusting that Allah knows more, right? Trusting that not everything is going to make sense, and it's either going to make sense in the future or in the afterlife or never. And I don't think there's ever going to be, I mean, maybe there is, depends on how many details are in the religion, but the more details there are, the more it is involved in everything, the less likely it will be to be consistent and logical in every single thing. So Islam was never really about being logical for people, like to spread it. It may be about finding logic in the parts that you want to understand or that are visible to you. in my case, to answer that question, in my case, I've always had questions about just everything in life, right? Like why that why of it rains. Why does it rain? Well, because condensation. Where does it come from? Things like that. And I had those questions about things in Islam, but it was easier for me to push them aside when I was told, okay, like some of these concepts are too big for you to understand. Some of them are just too big for all humans to understand. And as a child, or even a teenager, or even like in your 20s, you're more likely to think, I can't know everything. And you truly can't. So that is a good enough way to put it aside. But eventually you can't, or some of us can't. And yeah, I don't think Islam was 100% logical all the time when it came to certain things. So that's why it was easier for me to leave it than some people, but it wasn't easy at all. I couldn't value the attachment and the emotions and the fear. It didn't outweigh the fact that it didn't make sense. So I couldn't lie to myself in that case. But some people, they're not lying to themselves. It just drowns out the illogical part of Islam.
What about the concept of tawheed specifically? It's just the oneness of God. Was that something that, when you were Muslim, made sense to you, or did you not really think about it?
So this started with before Christianity. In my mind, it was polytheism and idolatry, and those things are always conflated and linked in Islam. And I thought of them as one. Like people worship a lot of gods or multiple gods. They have idols for them, and I remember distinctively the story of Prophet Ibrahim, and I remember thinking that's when the light bulb moment, one light bulb moment was as a child. Again, like I heard this when Ibrahim put an axe around the neck of one of the idols and said, maybe he's the one who destroyed the other ones. I remember thinking, like, come on, like even the polytheists I don't think they believe that this is actually God that animates itself like from stone and moves. So that part I didn't understand, but it was easy to dismiss because the rest of it made sense, which is how could there be more than one God? Because you're taught that this God has characteristics, like all the characteristics together, including being jealous of other gods. So how could there be multiple gods? Would they be jealous of each other? I wasn't yet like I wasn't yet aware enough to realize, well, how come like they could have different characteristics and work in harmony? That could be a characteristic of the gods, that they're team players, that there's not going to be conflict between them. So yeah, the Tawheed made sense back then because I didn't think into it deeply enough. I didn't have the capacity to.
I suppose in my case, which is, it's kind of funny to think about, but so I growing up, and even today, I'm a pretty logical person. I really try to think things out logically speaking, and try to figure out why things are happening like you did. But I never thought about Islam in that kind of way. So to me, I didn't believe in Islam because, oh, it logically makes sense. Tawheed makes sense logically speaking. It was just, this is what reality is. This is what life is. And that's that. And so never had these kinds of questions, never bothered looking into rationales of how, well, this is logical, but something like Christianity with its Trinity is illogical. It's just, oh, Christians are wrong. I didn't even have to get to that point. I was fully on board already. And I think what's the last thing I just mentioned on this point is, I think what's interesting is a lot of the Muslim apologists are people who I think were in my position, where they were raised into it, or they converted to it for emotional reasons, and then they realized at some point, when they heard criticisms of Islam, that, oh, I need to find something else to justify this belief, whether it's for their own sake or to convince others, which is also for their own sake too. And that's when the logical arguments start coming in. Whether you want to talk about how it's impossible that there could have been more than one creator, there had to be a first cause, an uncaused first cause, or
More like illogical arguments, don't you think?
yeah. I mean, they serve the purpose of rationalizing something that's already there.
Hmm.
So in my case, I didn't have to do that because they already had me hook, line, and sinker, or whatever that expression is.
Hmm.
So we have one more question.
I had a realization not that long ago
Oh,
that um, I what you said about the transition that some Dawa people may have had, I was going through that, except I wasn't able to make those so-called logical rationalizations make sense. Like I saw the issues in them. They weren't satisfying to me, but I went in with a position of trusting that there is an answer and trusting that they are one of the sources. And that's not like singling out some of the jokes of Dawa people that we know today. This was truly like just going to Dawa people, and that's not to use it in a derogatory way, just the scholars and sheikhs and the imams from a bunch of different backgrounds as well, like a bunch of different sects even, because I knew that the truth is out there. I just need to find it. And the realization that I had was, had I been convinced by one of these approaches, like I don't know if I would have been as maybe I would have had that same kind of urge to come out and say something about it because I see the other Dawa people doing a poor job of doing it. Maybe I still would have found a need for me to become Alauddin, but unironically Alauddin as in one who praises religion or raises its, I don't know, status. I could have become a Dawah person. I would have had so much more
Oh
success.
man, maybe
You
there's an
could have been making
alternate
videos about yeah.
there's an alternate universe. What would your let's imagine that there is this alternate universe. What would your moniker be? What would your name be?
Alauddin.
Just
Because it's
Aladdin?
yeah, or Muslim Aladdin or something. But Alauddin is a much more appropriate name. It's unironic, right? Because
True.
Alauddin means one who praises or raises the status of religion or something. And I think that, like, I wouldn't be full of myself, but I think I found a way that I can make this make sense, and I need to teach people that way because there are confused people. I would be thinking of the ex-Muslims, right? I'd be thinking those poor people who honestly couldn't find an answer. Like, I wouldn't have vilified them. I would have sincerely thought they're honest in their conclusions, and it's all because they didn't come across this fantastic answer that I found, this great rationalization, and I would be trying to help them find it. We could have been having this conversation too, except I was somehow going to be floundering and giving you some justification or another. We probably would have been friendly, you and I, like we sound like we would have gotten along. So
I hope
who
so.
knows? Who knows?
There's like an alternate universe where we're both Dawa boys. That would be amazing.
Oh god.
Next question from Nazone75. How do either of you deal with having Muslim names? I thought this was an interesting question. I don't think, have you ever gotten this question before? I haven't.
I may have read it, but not directed at me. I don't remember.
Yeah.
You go ahead first.
So, my actual name is a very common Muslim name. I won't say what it is, but it's kind of interesting because just living in the West too, where I just have a different name than a lot of people. I have a very obviously Muslim Arabic sounding name. Uh, it's hard to, and being not a Muslim anymore, it's hard to separate that from your identity because when people see my name, they assume I'm Muslim. When people, even if they're not even talking to me, but say I'm doing a job application or sending out an email, people are making assumptions about me. And the thing that's kind of troubling for me is that the assumption is I'm Muslim when I'm not. So it's already like there's a discord between who I really am and what people think of me just because of my name. I did briefly have a time period where I considered changing my name to something westernized. I'm glad I did not do that. And the way I kind of look at it now, and maybe it is more true to say is my general attitude is I find names are just labels. I mean, we can assign all the significance to them, but we can also take away their significance. So to me today, I would say overall it's not that big of a deal, but it does lead to some people making assumptions about me from time to time, and it leads to Uber drivers always trying to talk to me and sometimes telling me really disturbing things that they would only tell another Muslim that they wouldn't tell a non-Muslim.
Did
I'll
I
leave
tell
it
you a story about that specific situation happening to you?
the Uber driver situation.
Did I tell you a story about that
I don't
myself?
think so. No.
Okay. It's funny because when you said it, I was like, wait, is he talking about me? No, that did happen to me. Yeah. Anyway, sorry I interrupted you. Or
No, no,
you
no. I'm done. I'm done. Yeah.
okay?
So, unless you want to share your own
Yeah,
perspective. Oh, go ahead.
I've got a few
Let's hear it.
things to say about that. Um, First of all, like one situation where Coco Jasmine is saying, hopefully you are lucky, not named after Muhammad. Um, no comment, but it is a very, very Muslim name. Let's just leave it at that. Let's give people a little hint.
Okay.
I accidentally dox myself. Um, anyway, yeah, that is the peak irony. So I never considered changing my name to something less Arab or less Muslim or something. But I see people shaming those who do that or who consider it. I can see very easily how the vultures of the community, of the Muslim community, would jump on that and say, "See, you've always wanted to be a John all along. You've always wanted to be a white man. You know all that
Yeah.
stuff." And I empathize with the people who want to do that. And I can't even in good faith tell them, don't do it, just own it, all that stuff. Because some situations, like if it's truly that problematic in your life, if it's truly you don't want these reminders every day of your background, of what these people did to
Yeah.
you.
Well, like for example, if your name is Abdullah.
I mean, you could be named Abdullah and you still like do fine, but if even if your name is something not as obviously Islam related and it's not about people being mean to you, it could just be that you don't want every time you come across your name like to be a reminder of a life that you left behind because you were forced to leave behind, like in a dire situation like that. So I'm saying it's a spectrum. And you know how taqiyya is allowed, and taqiyya in the definition of if a Muslim is in danger, they can lie and say, I'm not a Muslim, just so they don't get persecuted, right? That is Islamically allowed. That's the actual definition of taqiyya. This would be kind of not even the equivalent, but similar to it. Like, why do you have to, if you're in a situation where it'd be more difficult, you don't want to be subjected to the presumptions about what people make about Muslims, be it unfair presumptions or presumptions based on what you are supposed to believe as a Muslim. The less, less extremist things, but things that still, you don't want that. You don't want your employer, for example, to think that you're gonna want to take like 3 breaks to pray or whatever. You just don't want a lot of these presumptions. That's understandable too. I personally don't feel like I have to do it, and I just want to own my name, and it's mine. It's not what uh, it's not Muslim. People say, why wouldn't you change it? Because it's my name. But one thing that bothered me is I was on LinkedIn and I'm seeing how infested LinkedIn has become with posts about Prophet Muhammad and whatever Islamic wisdom of the day. And I use infested because it's a platform for professional like talks and professional posts, and
Not anymore, man. It's changing.
they jump on it in every platform. Like you go on Quora and it's full of that. You go on Yahoo Answers and it's full of this. It's uh, and it's not just questions, it's people preaching it where it doesn't really belong. Like it's a secular platform. It's not about religion. And what bothers me is non-Muslims coming across that and linking it to, okay, there's a Muhammad who wrote this post, there's a Muhammad in the name, there's an Ahmed who liked it, and 40,000 people liked and shared this, and then I apply to a job and they see my name and they're like, I don't want this noise. Like like these people, would be that fair or not to presume that that all of these people act the same. It's an inherent risk and a bias in their mind. They're going to think I want nothing to do with that. So I hope for their own sake, whether they're Muslim or ex-Muslim, that people stop doing that, because you look like the kind of person forcing your religion, down other people's throats in their face where it doesn't belong. So I see why someone who's like down on job prospects in a location where it would be hard to get a job because of their name, totally valid reason. And if they've made their peace with it, go for it. Yeah, that's what I feel about these. And I hope that we get to a point in the future where like we would stop using names with Allah in them, for example, like we just move away from that. But also anyone with a Muslim sounding or Arab sounding name is not presumed to be a Muslim anymore. Just like you can have a name called Christopher or Chris, and you don't presume that they go to church every Sunday. You don't presume what they believe, or John, or a lot of these names started from,
Yeah.
Christian names. So I hope we get there. That's what I'm trying to teach people.
Yeah, they do exist though still in Christianity when you see certain names. I can't think of one right now, like Jebediah or something, where
Something with
okay,
an I, Jeremiah,
okay, that person
Joshua.
has at the very least religious parents.
Yeah, yeah, but that if it's that deep into it, then yes, you can. People do presume that at least their background is religious, but
Mhm.
like I hope we get to that point because Muhammad is one of the most common names in the world.
Yeah.
Uh, so not all these Muhammads are religious. So yeah,
Yeah. Claudius, thank you so much for joining. Claudius says it very well. This is kind of how I feel. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet, which is from Romeo and Juliet, unless I'm mistaken. I'm not a big Shakespeare person.
mhm,
And Hassan Radwan says part of normalizing apostasy is that having a Muslim name doesn't mean you must be a Muslim. And
exactly.
yeah, exactly. The thing is, at the same time, I do feel this thing of why should I change my name just because other people are making assumptions because of my name, which is one of the reasons why I didn't end up changing my name. And the reason I considered it was for work reasons. I was doing all of these online job applications, and I just visualized the perspective of the employer seeing my high school education was in the Middle East, seeing my name. And I mean, they're like in Canada, there I'm not saying that it's a horrible country, but racism does exist and it's kind of hidden in many ways. And I think one of those ways is your name in a job application. Yeah.
I face those issues too. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Robert has a few good examples of biblical names that if you have that name today, you're religious or your parents are religious.
yeah.
Ezekiel, Bartholomew.
Or first generation apostate, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think of this as a cat name, by the way? Bartholomew. Not bad, eh?
Too long.
Well,
I'll just end up calling them
you just
or
call him
Bart.
Bart. Yeah, you just call him Bart for short.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that short story, by the way, I'll tell you that story real quick about
let's hear it. Yeah.
presumptions. Um, I got in a car with Uber or taxi driver. I'm gonna be as vague as possible, and he was from a Middle Eastern background and a Muslim background, and I didn't want to presume that, but he started talking to me, and I was younger and shyer at that point, and I think I was still a Muslim, and so that's why I would entertain his conversation. Now I know to like how to shut it down politely and just be like, hey, like I'm not in the mood for a chat with personal questions, because once they know you're from a similar background, they dive deep into the questions as if like it's normal to ask somebody such a personal question. But anyway, he was telling me like we're all kind of on the same page up until he was like, oh, you used to live in Saudi Arabia. Well, the one thing they did right is not letting women drive. And I was like, hold up, what? Like that hit me out of nowhere. I was presuming that all Muslims were, I was a Muslim too. They wouldn't be in agreement with something like that, that Saudi Arabia doesn't let women drive. And then he went on to talk about how the woman is like a jewel and you got to protect her and like she can't go anywhere without a mahram. And I was like, all right, yeah, I'm just not going to talk about that. So yeah, that was one situation where I would have hoped that my name wasn't a Muslim so that he wouldn't start the conversation with me, because I don't care if he has those views. I mean, it sucks, but I don't have to be in a car with him for the rest of the 20 more minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Once this conversation starts, then you're kind of stuck in it for the rest of the way. And in my, I can't give you a specific example, like my memory of a specific anecdote, but in my experience, they'll just start talking to me about assuming I'm Muslim and saying things like, "Oh, this country is nice, it's safe, but the values are corrupt." You could kind of guess what they're going to say.
Yeah.
And the uncomfortable situations, and these are the ones where they haven't happened in a long time, and I think I would behave differently today than I did in the past, was when I'd hear people saying homophobic things or things that are just so unfair to Canada. And I would just say, "Oh, yeah, 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 yeah," or just stay silent. I don't know which one is worse, agreeing or staying silent. And
Agreeing probably.
yeah,
But no, I get where you're coming from, like having to do that back in the day. I know that in our positions today, we would probably say something else, but yeah. Or just not say anything if you truly just don't want to get into it at the moment. But I wouldn't agree with them, honestly. I would just, yeah.
yeah. I mean, do you want to get into a whole, you know, religious debate and argument with someone when you're just trying to get to a restaurant or get to whatever?
And
Yeah,
you're
I
not
mean,
going to change their mind, and
no,
it may have a negative impact not just on your mood but on the actual situation, like
yeah.
so yeah.
But yeah, so I just did the last call for questions. We do have one more from Robert, and unless anyone has any more questions, that might be the last one. Are you good for time?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. All right. So Robert's question is a two-parter. How can a non-Muslim best support their ex-Muslim friends or Muslim friends who are questioning? I'm asking because I see my friends leaving Islam and start drinking, and I'm not sure what to tell them without seeming judgy. So this one is awkward for me because I've mentioned this. I actually asked you this in one of your live streams, if you remember, Aladdin, where I was talking about how I have a 16-year-old Muslim friend, and I felt like, is it my place to talk to him about Islam, even though I never bring it up, he brings it up? Is it my place to say things? Is it my place to say my experience, my problems of Islam? He knows I'm not a Muslim anymore, but we haven't really discussed it anymore than that. Uh, in a nutshell, what I would advise is, depending on how close you are to them, stay out of it unless they ask you something. And if they do ask you something, just give your honest opinion. I mean, that's kind of too general, maybe, but as a rule of thumb, that's what I would say.
I would say yes, all of the above, but if you see, like, if you're close enough that you're able to do this without being like too intrusive for the nature of your relationship, I would comment on this one example of drinking, um, because I've been asked about this before. I don't know if it's like some kind of epidemic for ex-Muslims. I don't think so, but I've seen examples of that. And sometimes it's part of rebellion, like it's just doing all the things that you weren't allowed to do. And I want to remind them that just because like Islam is in agreement with something doesn't mean that you have to change your mind about it or that Islam is wrong on
A very
everything.
good point. I think I
I,
should mention that
mm,
I don't drink.
same
So,
here.
for health reasons.
I here's what I want to remind them of as well. Like just because I say, for example, alcohol is bad, right, doesn't mean that the Islamic way of handling alcoholism or drinking in
Thank
general
you.
is good. Like
Thank you.
it's not like here's one positive of Islam. No, the way that Islam handles it causes more issues because alcoholism is still a problem in a lot of these places in the Middle East, and um, people can make alcohol if they don't sneak it in, and like it's still an issue. And it just ends up that the people who really are desperate to get it are the most harmed and the most harmful to others. So there's a lot more to it than that. But my point is to get back to the question. I would just remind them that as your point of view as someone who didn't have that restriction as much, I'm presuming, Robert, um, is to remind them it's not all that it's cracked up to be. Like just because you're allowed to do it, just be careful with your experimentation or wherever it may be, and remember that it fades away, that thrill, and it's just not overall. It's not a good thing. Even yeah, just be careful. Like remind them to be careful, and that if you're the kind of person who does drink, I don't know, Robert, if you do or not, maybe offer to do it with them so that it's more controlled of a way. If that's what you do, that's my advice. Maybe. Yeah.
Very well said. And one last thing from Robert here. I do have experience with alcoholism. Would it make it worse to share that? Um, I think if anything, it seems like very valid to share that in that context. Wouldn't you say, Aladdin?
Yeah, I mean, you could remind them that it doesn't mean obviously they might think you're biased, or you would have to like you'd worry, what if they think I'm biased because I am someone who is closer to a case, or I myself have had experience with it. But remind them that you're not saying that's how it's always going to be, because they would be sensitive to this way of preaching, which is look at the worst case scenario. This is how you're going to turn out, right? And we ex-Muslims realize that this kind of slippery slope argument isn't always true, and we're aware of it now, and we don't believe in it. But remind them that you're not saying this is how they will turn out, but you're reminding them of one outcome of overindulging. So it's just something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Hmm. And I think I like what Music Guy says. Everything in moderation. If it becomes a problem, that means they have an underlying problem that needs treatment. For me, I would say the whole Islamic notion, and this is like a very ancient conservative viewpoint on certain things. It's this idea that, oh, this thing we have designated that this thing is bad, let's ban it. and let's threaten all these horrifying punishments if you do it. And I don't think that's the right way to go about it, because I think there's an element where it will encourage people to just try it anyway, or to do it anyway. And I think the better argument is, if I was talking to someone about like drinking alcohol, I'd say go ahead, drink it, try it, but don't do it too much. It's tied to all sorts of harmful consequences, whether it's like increasing your risk of cancer. Um, it makes your skin age faster. There's all sorts of issues that can lead to if you drink too much. In moderation, it's probably fine. I mean,
It's
I mean,
it's a cost benefit analysis. Like, think
yeah,
of it that way. Like, what are you hoping to gain from this? And it could be depending on the situation too. Like, maybe drinking alone at home is different than going out with friends and having one drink. Like, it really depends on who the friends are too. So think to yourself, what am I gaining by doing this? And what is the potential harm? And what is the actual, like, right effect right away? And more often than not, you'll find that it's not worth it. And when it is worth it, like in your mind, you'll stay away from the harmful outcome, I
yeah,
think.
yeah.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, neither of us are health experts. We're not counselors on
No.
this subject or anything. This is just like our opinion. So take it with a grain of salt. Uh, and two quick questions here. I think they're both for me, and then maybe we can sign off. So Jojo Freelancer KUP, do you want to go on Myth Vision podcast? Why not? I've seen a few I've seen a few videos. It seems like a good channel from what I've seen. I don't know too much about the person behind it, but I've been recommended to check it out and to reach
Mhm.
out and try to get on. My channel is still pretty small. I'm not sure if I have a big enough platform to maybe
I mean,
interest.
he did have a chat with me. I don't remember how small my channel was, but it wasn't like, even now it's small. But
You were pretty prominent on TikTok too, though.
I don't
Before,
remember. I think at that point I was like over it. And even on TikTok, like my biggest growth was like 8,000 followers before they shut down my channel, and now it's just like at 2 or something. So yeah, it might be worth reaching out to him, because I think
okay,
he'd be interested in your perspective because of the niche that we're in, not just simply because of the size and influence. Like, it's a new perspective. So I would recommend doing that.
okay. I'll
Yeah.
look into it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Robert says, "Thank you for this advice, guys. Very helpful." And last question from Coco Jasmine: how was bacon? I mean, I'll let you answer that too if you want. Um,
Yeah.
there wasn't a momentous occasion where it was like angelic choir music playing in the background where I pulled open the Wendy's Baconator, and the smell, the aroma just entranced me until like I kind of floated through the air towards the bacon. Um, it tasted good. What can I say? Bacon is pretty good. I think some parts of pork are not that great. I'm not a big fan of like the whole pot roast kind of thing. Uh, Pepperoni's pretty good. Can't go wrong. It's something that I would say I never it, it- I never found it to be a big issue when I was Muslim. It was like, okay, I won't have bacon. And when I did have it wasn't a big deal. So not very exciting. Sorry to disappoint you.
Well,
Aladdin?
similar but different.
Okay.
So yeah, as a Muslim, it was never really like, oh, I wish I could try bacon if only I could, or what am I going to do? I can't eat here or there because it's bacon. That wasn't really a big concern for me. What was annoying was if there's some kind of like gelatin or something that is derived from bacon or like adjacent to where they make bacon, or pork in general. That was kind of annoying because I'm like, what's the spirit of this rule? Like, is this really a problem health wise? No, it's just because God said so. Then fine. That was the most annoying part. And then when I tried it, bacon is good. Uh, I used to think turkey bacon was great, like a great alternative, and it was good enough for me. Like, here's the thing: if you want to never try bacon, never try bacon. But if you do both, you'll never go back to turkey bacon, like ever. It
Nope.
it tastes like rubber to me now. It's sad.
No,
I,
it's
I
ruined
mourn the
forever.
loss of yeah, I mourn the loss of turkey bacon for me. Um, but the rest of the animal, like anything porky tasting, not really into it. So similar to you. And again, bacon is not that big of a deal, but it is good. Yeah. to
Awesome.
me. Like it's yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing wrong with bacon. Yeah. Just to your point quickly, well, the rationale for the whole bacon, the pork thing that I learned was that pigs are disgusting animals, filthy animals, and that they can get parasitic worms or whatever in the meat. And so it's for our own protection that it's
I think
restricted.
that's a rationalization more than anything.
No, no,
That
I know. I agree.
yeah,
And it doesn't even apply in the modern age anymore. I mean,
it's
our
because God
pigs.
said so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Now Zone 75 says, why can we not send dollars here? This is something this is the second time I've been asked this week, so it might be something I set up in the near future. If people want to support me, that would be great. To your point, Aladdin, yeah, I think it's to get the super chats. I think you have to have 1,000
I
subscribers,
think so.
followers.
Do you have monetization at all? Like,
I
as in,
haven't even looked into it, to be honest.
no, I think
Uh,
you'd get like notified for it. I wasn't on my radar, and I think I even hit 1,000 subscribers, and I still couldn't I couldn't do it because I didn't have enough watch time or something. So yeah, it's obviously, see, it's not even a concern for him. Neither was it for me. It
I
just
ain't doing
yeah,
this for the money, let me tell you that. I
yeah,
could have picked much more popular things to talk about.
yeah.
Yeah, and Robert says pork was a problem in the Middle East back then, but with modern agriculture techniques, it is not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great place to end talking about bacon. Anyone else hungry? You know what's just to, because I think it is fitting. I will get something to eat for dinner that has bacon as a component.
You see,
Thank
so
you
you
for the
chose to.
suggestion, Coco Jasmine. Yes, the
Did you
smell
choose
is
it with
great.
your free will? Like, did you choose it with your free will to?
Let's not get into the whole free will discussion, please. It's been a long week.
Yeah.
Maybe another time. But yeah,
So you're
thank you so
choosing
much.
not to get into that discussion.
Oh my god. Okay, we're stopping this right here. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and for sharing your insights and your input and for asking us so many very good questions. Hopefully, we can do another live stream together soon. I guess it's your turn next time
Sure.
to be
Yeah.
the host.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone else, I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope you found this video informative, educational, and yeah, I'll be back with another video soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.